So I'm very pleased to welcome you all here for this academic conference, which is co-hosted by our Department of Politics, the American Family Project, and our office. We're very glad to participate in this effort to make Orestes Brownson much better known as an important and singular figure in American history and political and social thought, influenced very heavily, I might add, by his conversion to Catholicism at the age of 41. This is particularly propitious at this moment in our nation's history. Brownson has an awful lot to share with us that's quite relevant to both our past as a nation and, I would argue, our future. I want to thank Tom McDonough, Bob Moffett, Marianne Cusimano-Love, and all the organizers, all the participants that made this conference possible. A very personal note about my knowledge of Orestes Brownson. I moved to South Bend, Indiana to work at another Catholic university in January of 2008 as the Dean of Engineering. I'm a chemical engineer by profession. And early on, I would regularly attend Mass in the crypt of Sacred Heart Basilica there on campus. And as I would process up to receive the Eucharistic communion, I would walk across the embedded tombstone with the inscription, "Here lies Orestes A. Brownson, who acknowledged humbly the true faith, lived a complete life, and by writing and speaking courageously, defended both his church and his country. And granted that his body may have been taken by death, the endeavors of his mind remain immortal monuments of genius." Other American Catholics, particularly in his generation, have been recognized for founding religious orders, for their work in education, for their care of the disadvantaged. St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, Catherine Drexel, Isaac Hecker, and many others come to mind. Bronson's place is unique in American Catholicism. As a convert from Protestantism, and not just one branch of Protestantism, but indeed from Presbyterianism, Unitarianism, Transcendentalism. I think he started his own sect. Brownson had himself harbored anti-Catholic sentiment, and so he knew the spirit of Protestantism really from the inside out. One commentator wrote of him as the premier Catholic apologist of the 19th century, but Brownson was not so much an apologist as he was an apostle to apologists, since he held that by a special grace of God, America could only have been founded by Protestants, but it would only be maintained and flourish by Catholics. His conclusion was that it was every American Catholic's patriotic duty to convince Protestants that Jesus is not an abstraction, he's not a result of one's religious sentiment, but he's a person who is alive in the Eucharist and alive seated at the right hand of the Father and available to us at any time in prayer, fellowship, and the sacraments. Early in his life, if you read his writings from the beginning, his engagement in human affairs had been, I would say, quite socialist, and he was committed to lifting up the lower classes, installing the kingdom of God on earth through political means. As his thoughts evolved over time, he began to realize that human nature wounded by sin was incapable of lifting itself up by its bootstraps, and that the authentic lifting up of the human race had already been accomplished by Jesus on the cross, and that it was necessary for the Republic to perdure and grow without withering and dying. It was essential that Catholics evangelize and indeed re-evangelize the nation and help them understand the supernatural character of redemption. In 1856, in a piece that begins by applauding Bishop Martin John Spalding on his book Miscellanea, which you can still purchase through Christian Classics, Brownson wrote, "Labor, trade, law, medicine, every honest calling may be converted into prayer, and in fact is prayer if done in and for the love of God. In this sense, he anticipated the movement of Vatican II, which in Lumen Gentium states the laity, by their very vocation, seek the kingdom of God by engaging in temporal affairs and by ordering them according to the plan of God. Brownson's love for our Constitution is well known, as will come out in the course of our proceedings. The realities of creation from nothing, the incarnation of the Son of God, his passion, his death and resurrection, and his eternal presence seated at the right hand of the Father were always present to Brownson, whether he was writing on literature, social thought, science, politics. Tom McDonough asked me to speak, and the topic of this conference is really the mission of America. And so I read very carefully Brownson's essay on this topic, titled the same, The Mission of America, in his quarterly from 1856, which I already referenced. The essay, entitled The Mission of America, begins with his assessment of Bishop Martin John Spaulding's recent book, Miscellanea. Brownson was incredibly fond of and influenced by Bishop Spaulding, although I know they had some fiery words for each other in their correspondence. Bishop Spaulding ultimately became the Archbishop of Baltimore, America's primatial see, and he played a very important role in the founding of our university. In fact, Archbishop Spaulding in the First Council of Baltimore argued very much for the founding of a national Catholic research university, which ultimately became our university. It's also noteworthy that his nephew, John Lancaster Spaulding, who became the Bishop of Peoria in 1877, consecrated by Cardinal Gibbons, succeeded his uncle in Baltimore. These three men, the two Spauldings and Cardinal Gibbons, really can rightfully be cited as the fathers of our university. So I find that providential that we're having this conference on Orestes Brownson at a time when we just had the Leo lecture talking about the founding of our university and the role that Pope Leo and Cardinal Gibbons played. So to give you a flavor of the power of Brownson's pen, I want to share just a few ideas from the mission of America. So what in his mind is the mission? It's nothing less than the total infusion into our late modern civilization, which was already present in embryonic form in Orestes' time, of Christianity in all its transformative potential to create a more advanced civilization of freedom, justice, and love. So I want to just share a little bit of his rhetoric, which has been called the greatest writing of the 19th century. So, quote, "As a people, we have very generally the conviction that divine providence has given us an important mission and has chosen us to work out for the world a higher order of civilization than has hitherto obtained. We look upon ourselves as a providential people, as a people with a great destiny, and a destiny glorious to ourselves and beneficent to the world. This fact indicates generous instincts and a noble future, and it will not be without its influence in kindling lofty aspirations in our bosoms and urging us on in the path of a true and legitimate ambition. We believe ourselves the people of the future, and that belief itself will do much to make us so." So, as we listen to Brownson's words, we should not think that Brownson was an idealist, although he was, and that he's somehow blind to our natural flaws and shortcomings. He was very much aware of them. He knew them all too well from his own personal experience and the multiple conversions he had as he vigorously sought out the truth. And I just want to share one other quote with you that I think drives that point home. "Let no one, because we thus speak, hastily conclude that we overlook the discrepancy which exists between the actual character of a large portion of our countrymen and the principles of our American order." He was a realist. He knew well that fallen human nature can lead to barbarism. His thesis in the mission, which is shockingly original and prescient for 1856 or 1956 or 2026, is that without supernatural grace and God's maximum assistance to redeem us, nature alone, and fallen human nature in particular, will devolve badly into either servility and a loss of rights and dignity, or worse, disorder, anarchy, pagan cruelty, and inhumanity. Brownson deduced all this simply from his observations of the history of the late 1700s and early 1800s. Recall the turmoil that was present then in society. Note that Brownson wrote in 1856 and had yet to witness the barbarism of the Holocaust, or the Holodomor in Ukraine, or the killing fields of Khmer Rouge, or Mao's Cultural Revolution, or any number of mass terrorist acts. All of this barbarism was fomented by persons lacking in Christian ideals or aided by supernatural grace. So Brownson perceived that this was the civilization to which we must aspire. So how did he propose we get there? He argues repeatedly in his essay for a whole new order of civilized life, an advanced civilization built on what he argues is the solid foundation established by our founders, with the important elements of, first of all, freedom and the protection of individual rights and liberties, but also religious liberty in particular and the protection of religious freedoms. Brownson knew well that humankind must come to Christ in a free act of the will, because it is the freedoms that God bestowed on us at creation which has enabled our fallen human nature. So to undo the effects of our fallenness, we must use our freedom well and judiciously and virtuously. And Brownson believed that the only way to do this was with God's abundant supernatural graces made available to us through the church, His teachings and His sacraments. Not many in his time or our own are so adept at integrating the divine realities with the secular. Yet this is our calling. This is the mission of America. Brownson has much to teach us about courageously living our faith in ordinary life. So Brownson was fully American and fully Catholic, something our university strives to be. In fact, we use that phrase often in describing the Catholic University of America. And indeed, the very person who influenced Brownson to conceive of his mission to America, Bishop Martin John Spalding, and his nephew, John Lancaster Spalding, are the very same persons who enabled the founding of our university some 30 years later. The Archdiocese of Baltimore has a great quote that I'll close with. Accepting Orestes Brownson, Bishop Martin John Spalding was the most influential American Catholic apologist in the antebellum period, his efforts being particularly attuned to American audiences. So my hope for you today is that you begin to discover the richness of his thought in this conference. It's well worth our time and energy. And lest you think I'm valorizing Brownson maybe inappropriately, let's recall that he renounced a lot of his early thinking and his early essays. And so what I admired the most about Brownson was that he was simply following truth to its natural conclusion. He vigorously pursued it all his life. As we say at Mass every day, he was a person of goodwill. He simply wanted to discern the truth, and he followed it wherever it led. So I hope you have a wonderful conference. I'm going to apologize in advance. I have to go to an academic senate meeting, which is about as enjoyable as having a root canal, but I'll do it anyway. But I'll rejoin you for lunch and Rick Santorum's talk, and may God bless you all.
Thank you very much.